So we're going to have now our guest, Michael Taylor. He is an author and an entrepreneur. And in his description of himself, he talked about being a high school dropout and having a lot of problems with foreclosures and being homeless. But now he's a successful author, motivational speaker, and so he's going to tell us how he turned it all around and some of his advice for other people. So you got your mic on, Michael?
We are ready to rock and roll.
Okay, ready to rock and roll. Okay, well, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV. Now, what's in your background there? What is this? That your book cover?
Well, no, that's my radio program called Shattering Stereotypes, which is targeted specifically to Black men. It's a podcast.
Oh, okay. Now, when does it come on?
Well, I do 2 or 3 a month. I don't have a specific time because they're all pre-recorded and they're put on my website.
Okay.
So you can access all of the interviews that I have in the podcast at shatteringBlackMaleStereotypes.com.
Okay, and what is your theme? I mean, I know it's generally shattering Black male stereotypes, but how do you approach it in your podcast?
Well, again, it's called Shattering Stereotypes, and it's been said throughout the media that there's a lack of Black male role models, but there's never been a lack of Black male role models. There's only been a lack of exposure of those role models. So my intention is to showcase and highlight Black men who are doing remarkable things in the world. So I've got guys on there that are spine surgeons, athletes, celebrities, authors, mayors, just a wide variety of Black men sharing information with other Black men on how they became successful and providing tools to support Black men in what I'll call Black male empowerment.
Okay.
So I like the fact that, so it sounds like you're being intentional. I'll probably say that word a lot because there's some great authors on the show tonight, but you're being intentional about changing the conversation about Black men. I think often when it comes to Black people in general, but especially with Black men, you know, we always lean toward the stereotype when we start to describe Black men. You know, they have a million baby mamas. Their credit is bad. We think it's funny to perpetuate those stereotypes instead of lifting people up with positive talk. So it sounds like that's what you're trying to do with your podcast.
Yeah, and again, in the book, Shattering Black Male Stereotypes, what I talk about are what I call the 10 most destructive media-generated illusions about Black men. And an illusion is something that people think is real, but isn't really real. Mm-hmm. And so stereotypes and illusion I use interchangeably. But if, again, as you mentioned, if you look throughout our media, we are constantly bombarded with negative images about Black men. But rather than point fingers and place blame at the media, my intention is to say, okay, Black men, what can we do to transform our lives? And so my specialty is actually the changing roles of masculinity in society. I've written a total of 9 books, and 5 of them specifically for Black men. But most of my work is around changing the paradigm of masculinity. Because if you look at the primary issues in our society, most of them can be directly related to men who are trapped in what I'll call an antiquated paradigm of masculinity. And so if we want to remove a lot of the social ills in our society, we have to have this conversation about changing the mindset of men. And of course, with Black men, it's even twice as difficult because of the stereotypes and the negativity that we receive through the media.
Okay, now you talked about illusions. I want to hear about a couple. I know I don't want you to tell them all because I know they're in the book, and people won't get the book if they know everything that's in the book. But just name 2 of the illusions that in the media that are perpetuated.
Well, first of all, let me share how I became a writer, because this is really important. Okay. Back in 1994, I was in a restaurant and I overheard a conversation between these 2 apparently well-educated, well-dressed professional Black men. And they were having a conversation about the eradication of Black men from society. And it was one of the most depressing conversation I'd ever heard. So I listened for a while, and then I got up, I walked over to their table, I apologized for eavesdropping, but I looked at one of the guys and I said, man, please tell me you don't believe what you just said. And the guy looks at me and he says, absolutely. And then he said this, don't you watch the news? He said, I believe in 20 years, all Black men will either be dead or in jail.
He was serious? He really felt that way?
That's exactly how he felt. And it wasn't what he said, but how he said it that literally broke my heart. I said, man. So I knew there was nothing I could do to change his mind. So I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, don't believe the hype. And I walked away. But as I walked away, there was something in me that said, I have to do something. I didn't know what, but there was a part of me that just knew I had to do something to help change the mindset of Black men. And that's when I started writing back in 1994. And I wrote a book called Brothers, Are You Listening? A Success Guide for the New Millennium. And it was my attempt to help change the mindset of Black men. And so the first illusion that I talk about in the book is the illusion that, or the stereotype that Black men are an endangered species. Mm-hmm. So these Black men were trapped in that illusion. That's why they were having that conversation, because they had bought into the negative media stereotypes based on everything you see throughout the media. I can understand how some Black men might feel that way. But think about this. That was in 1994.
Right. And it's more than 20 years.
And it's more than 20 years. And look at what we've accomplished in that time frame. Mm-hmm. So I happen to be an irrepressible optimist. And the lens through which I see the world is one of optimism and possibility. And so my job as a coach, as a life coach, is to support Black men in changing their mindsets to create a more positive attitude.
Okay. Now I encountered that stereotype about the endangered species that I hear from women sometimes. Mm-hmm. That there's, and I think some men perpetuate this so they can run game better, but they'll say for every Black man there's for every Black woman there's for every Black man there's like 8 women or something. And I challenged somebody about that.
So Black women do unfortunately outnumber Black men, but okay. You're right though. I think that they use it to run game, to make it seem like it's they have more than one girlfriend.
But they do, but statistically, okay, if you look at the science, there is 1-to-1 on birth rate, because that's the way nature, God, or whatever. For every male, there's a female. That's look at any actual science on births of humans. Okay, once in terms of being born, actually, male births are slightly more than females. So if we start there, it starts off 1-to-1. So somewhere now we do have some in prison. Okay, and we do have some that just aren't, trying to do better. So, but as far as actual numbers, neither one is, and our birth rate is higher than every group except Hispanic.
Well, but here's the thing though, Gwen. Here's the thing. A statistic can be construed to say whatever you want it to say.
It can.
So my contention is that as Black men, we have the capacity to create extraordinary lives. Mm-hmm. Despite racism, despite discrimination, despite all these negative stereotypes, as Black men, we have the capacity. Now, the problem has been we haven't had enough resources to support us in doing so. So as mentioned, I have been writing about men's issues for more than 25 years. And 90% of the time that I'm at a conference or doing a workshop, I'm the only brother in the room. And so as I was going through this process of my own healing and transformation, I realized that a lot of times as Black men, we simply don't have exposure to the information that can support us in creating extraordinary lives. So I said to myself, well, I'm going to create that resource. Therefore, I started writing books. I started doing seminars, webinars. I do my podcast. I have 2 TV shows. And the whole intention is to let Black men see what's possible for us. You know, I'm sure you've heard of the organization 100 Black Men, right? You've
Yeah.
heard of the organization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I love their motto that says, what they see is what they'll be. And so
Okay.
what we have to do is we have to expose more Black men to men like myself and the men that are on my podcast who are successful by all standards, and let them see what's possible. Because there are a lot more things that are right with the world than are wrong with it. But unfortunately, too many times we buy into that media stereotype, that media narrative, and that's why that number one illusion is so destructive. Because when we see things like George Floyd and you know, Philando Castile, murders like that, then psychologically it has an impact on young Black men. So how do we combat that? The question is, how do we combat that? Well, we have to provide the resources to give Black men an opportunity, first of all, to discuss and to have conversations about how they're processing all this trauma. Because trauma has an impact. Black men sometimes shut down and don't talk about the fear, the sadness, you know, the anger that when we see all this negativity. So what my work does is provides a safe space for Black men to come to talk intimately and openly about how they feel. And that's the key. That's what's been missing for us as Black men.
Okay.
Do
Now,
you
do
think
you feel that?
um,
Okay, go ahead, Rhonda. Hopefully, I won't
do
forget my question.
I'm trying to ask this one. I need to get it out though.
Okay.
Okay. When it what I've been seeing, at least with this generation, Generation Z, you know, we Generation Xers are always talking about the Generation Z and the millennials. And you know, they just don't understand. But what I've seen with those generations is that I believe that they are actually trying to be more intentional about changing the conversation when it comes to Black men, you know, because they, I mean, I think with us, you know, our ancestor was the baby boomer. So, you know, the baby boomers passed off what they could, but we were the ones who were trying to, you know, go off to college and get their advanced degrees. And I think that when we brought in the next generation, that's what they saw. So they started trying to do better. So I think slowly but surely the conversation is changing. But I think you're right in that we need to continue to put those positive examples out there. So we're giving them access to more examples of what success looks like.
Well, I'm a baby boomer. I'm 60 years old,
Well,
and
you don't
so
look 60.
thank you.
No, you don't. You don't.
I'm 60 years, but to your point, it is my belief, first of all, the problem with our society in general is that we create labels.
Mm-hmm.
And labels don't identify who we are. Okay, so you can call them baby boomers, Gen X's, and so forth. But if you look at it collectively from a standpoint of human evolution, human beings are still evolving. Black people are evolving. We are, in my opinion, we're doing better now than we ever have. And the statistics will show that when you look at the amount of businesses we have, the amount of people that are graduating from colleges, it's really up there. A lot of people don't see the progress that we're making.
Yeah, and that's my exact point. Is that
Yes.
we are doing better. It's not really so much about the label of each generation. It's just that each generation has fed into the next generation, and the next generation is starting to see more examples of of success, of positivity, and they're building on that. So now our millennial generation, and I'm saying that just to show what
Sure.
generation I'm talking about. But I just see that okay, they want to change the conversation. They want to show what success looks like. So that's what they're working toward. I mean, I think unfortunately everybody wants to be a professional, so to speak. So nobody wants to do the service related jobs anymore. But I think it's helping to change that conversation.
Yeah, and to your point, when you look at like the Black Lives Matter movement, okay, the
Mhm.
young activists that are coming out and you know and heading a lot of the movements and the protests and so forth. And are you familiar with Afrotech?
I've heard of it.
Yes,
Yeah,
I've heard of it.
yeah, it's a newsletter that comes out, and in essence, it basically shows you all the positive things that are happening in the entrepreneurial community for Black folk. And it showcases, you know, for example, companies that are receiving $1 million funding and venture capital. And it's an amazing resource that I think every Black person should read, because it shows you the progress and the success that we have that you don't see in mainstream media. So again, my intention from the standpoint of Black men is to challenge Black men to have deeper conversations. And here's what I mean by that. It is my belief that an extraordinary life contains 4 components, okay? Inner peace, dynamic health, great relationships, and financial abundance. Now, if you have those 4 things in your life, your life can be extraordinary. But you must be willing to do the work, if you will, the self-introspective work, to figure out what it is that may be keeping you from having those things in your life. And so a coach's job is to provide you with some tools. And those tools are tools of awareness. And these tools of awareness can be learned by anyone who wants to learn them. Now, I'm a huge advocate of books, obviously, because I've written 9. But if we're going to change our mindsets, we have to start reading books. We have to start going to workshops. We have to participate in online courses. We have to engage in our own transformation. And that's why I created the portal, Shattering Black Male Stereotypes, because on that site, there's courses, there's books, there's online podcasts, there's interviews. It is an unlimited resource of possibilities for Black men.
Okay, now my question was, for your podcast, do you feel like you could be preaching to the choir? And by that, I mean the thing that motivated you originally, the 2 men that you saw in the restaurant, would they, if they were living still, but would they be willing to listen to your podcast? And if not, then how do you reach the people who are not already in the mindset that you are, the same like-minded people? How do you expand beyond the like-minded?
Yeah, you have to meet people where they are. And the truth is, not a lot of Black men are willing to invest in their personal growth and development. They'll invest in things like stocks and money and stuff like that, but they don't deal with their emotional, psychological, and spiritual well-being. But at the same time, there are a lot of men who do. So there are a lot of men like myself who's gone through a divorce, you know, who's dealt with those issues of divorce and dealing with their children and how to make relationships work. There are a lot of men, I believe, that are really hungry for this conversation. And the reason that I say that is because of the success I've had with the books now. And when the George Floyd thing happened, then all of a sudden there was an explosion of people wanting to have this conversation, even white people bringing me on to talk about these stereotypes so that white people could go, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that, you know, that kind of thing. But more importantly, Black people, Black men are saying, you know what? I want a deeper experience of life. How do I do that? We spend a lot of time talking about race and racism and society, but it isn't until we learn to become self-introspective. One of my favorite sayings is, if you don't go within, you'll always go without. So you have to be willing to go within your own heart and mind and make those inner changes if you want to create that inner peace, dynamic health, great relationships, and financial abundance. But it's possible for us. And now there are resources that support men in doing that.
Okay. Now, what was the second illusion? The first one is the endangered species one.
Well, I'll throw this one out because this is a big one. And it's the illusion that black men can't be monogamous. So there's this illusion that Black men have to have multiple sex partners, and we're so hypersexualized in the media that people don't understand that as Black men we can be loving, caring, sensitive men. But mainstream media very seldom shows this. Now, what's amazing is when Barack Obama became president, all of a sudden white people were like, oh, I didn't know Black men could be that loving. Duh, we've been that way forever. But here's the downside. A lot of brothers got mad because they said, oh, now we got to try to live up to Barack Obama to get a woman. But my point is there's this illusion that as Black men, we can't be monogamous. And that is just that. It's an illusion. I've been blissfully married for the past 19 years, happily together for 21 years. And I've coached hundreds of men around the globe to help them understand the importance of having deep, fulfilling, rewarding, intimate relationships, because a lot of us don't have the tools to do that.
Well, Rhonda, I saw you smiling when he said that.
I smiled.
And
No, I smiled because when he said what he said, it reminded me of the guy who tried to start the hashtag Black Men Don't Cheat. You know,
mm,
there really wasn't any science behind it. He was just trying to start this hashtag Black Men Don't Cheat. So that was the only reason I started smiling, is because I remember, I just
I
remembered
knew
that.
it was something behind that. And probably it doesn't help. But I mean, there are instances, but when the extreme instances are given such a large exposure, like the guy on Ayala Van Zandt show that had
Oh yeah, he
he
had
had
what?
17
Big
women, I forgot how many
Mama,
kids, 30 something children,
yeah.
and him, and there was another one that was in the news is similar. When those get the exposure, that further perpetuates that.
Well, but see
And
this,
then,
but the media wants to use that sensationalism.
yeah, that's what I was gonna
It
say.
is.
That's what the media does, and
Mhm.
of course, reality TV is a big thing. So for people that want to watch that kind of stuff, which there will be people who like watching it, they're never going to tune into my podcast. But for people who want to create great relationships, for people who want to have rewarding and fulfilling lives, they're looking for things like this. They're looking for resources to support and empower them. And that's what we need more than ever for Black men.
Well, I would agree with you. Now, I did watch the one with Yellen Van Zandt only because I wanted to know why in the world these women would keep. I wanted to know first, what is this guy? What does he have? Like, is he fine, like super fine, or what? What is it about this guy that keeps getting these women that know about each other to participate in this madness? That was
Well,
why I watched it. So
my
I didn't.
the sadness to me though is not so much him, because most people will look at him as a clown or what have you. What saddens me is the men who see a man who's dedicated to his wife or his girlfriend or what have you, who's doing all of these great things to cultivate their relationship, and then you have the guy that calls them a simp, who calls them whipped, and always makes fun of them, say, "Oh, you got to check in. Why you got to check in?" Oh, and stuff like that. And if the guy is not strong-minded, then he's like, "Well, I don't want my boys to make fun of me, so let me go ahead and just stay out a little longer. Or let me stop doing these nice things so I can stop being called a simp." So basically, I'm just saying there are the people who, and it's the same way for women. The single woman who always has something to say about the married woman who checks in with her husband, or who says, "Let me talk to my husband." Why you got to talk to him? You know, I think sometimes we kind of bring each other down when we make statements like that.
Yeah, and again, that's what this whole what I call antiquated paradigm of masculinity
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm,
drives this behavior that says, I wrote a book called A New Conversation with Men. And in that book, I talk about what I call the 5 illusions of manhood. And the first illusion is to be a man, you must be non emotional and disconnected. Therefore, a lot of men buy into this idea that men aren't supposed to feel. We aren't supposed to be in touch with our emotions and our feelings. So it's seen as a sign of weakness. It's seen, as you mentioned, you call a sissy or a wimp or a punk
Mm-hmm.
because you're expressing your emotions. And it's a huge challenge to engage men in this conversation because the cultural conditioning is so strong that a lot of men buy into that illusion. But it takes a courageous man to simply say, I'm ready. I'm ready to change my life so that I can create loving relationships because they are available. And if you're willing to do the work, I provide tools that support and empower men to be able to do that. And the men in my community aren't afraid to say how much they love their wives or how much they love being with their kids. And that's what the conversation we should be having.
mm. Well, a lot of those men who are like running game and just running the streets and want to have a woman here, woman there, when they get old, that's when they're by themselves. They don't realize it till they get old. Then the women that they screwed around with, they're not there anymore. And the young women, they don't want an old man unless he's got money. He's got to have some serious money, and that's what it's too late then. But they are out there because when I got divorced from my first husband, The thing I was looking for was a man who would be monogamous. They only wanted to be with me. And that's what I got. I've been married 29 years. I tell people my husband does not run women. He never did. He never, I never ever once had that as an issue. And that I'm blessed in that regard because I know that's not the case for everyone.
Well,
But again, I still say that the younger generation of men, of males, are looking for something deeper. They're looking for that connection. They're looking for that intimacy. Now, if they're paying attention to mainstream media, they'll never find it. But if they're really looking, I believe something will show up. Things like my podcast, my book, and there are lots of Black organizations out there that are saying the same thing that I'm saying. You just don't see them in mainstream media.
Mm-hmm. Well,
right.
their goal is not to.
You're looking for, Gwen. I'm looking for that monogamous man. But see, you've been married 29 years, and I've been single 20.
Well, I was single in between, and the first one I didn't know what. Well, I can only assume he wasn't because he was never home. So I can only assume that. But I wanted someone who was into me, that wanted to focus on me, that was in love with me. That after you have a bad experience and you say, okay, this is what I really need. You can't take things for granted. I think when you're young, you take a lot of things for granted. You assume things about people that aren't there. And once you've been through a few things, then you understand, okay, this is what I have to have. I have to have somebody monogamous. Because one, I don't want anybody bringing home any diseases or extra kids. And I just don't want the drama of other women calling, coming. Women are crazy. When they think they should have claim to your man, they can do some crazy stuff. So I didn't want any of that.
Yeah, and again, in our society, in our culture, the second illusion is that to be a man, you must use sexual conquest as a gauge for manhood. So there are a lot of men that fall into that trap, thinking that by sleeping with a lot of women, it makes them a man. Well, I changed that conversation. I help men recognize that that's not what a real man is. A real man is capable of creating rewarding, loving, fulfilling, monogamous relationships. And that's what my work is all about.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we only have 4 minutes left, unfortunately. So if you can remind everybody the name of your book.
And your podcast.
Yes. And your contact information.
Shattering Black Male
Stereotypes.
Okay.
And the website is shatteringBlackMaleStereotypes.com. Okay. And on that site, you'll have access to my podcast, to courses, to more books that I've written. Everything that I do, you can find on that site. And it's a resource specifically for Black men.
Okay, so can women listen to your podcast or no?
Absolutely. I actually have a lot of women that listen.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
I'm sorry?
You encourage them to call in? Oh no,
I don't have call-ins. I don't have call-ins on my podcast. It's an interview format, so I'm just interviewing men. And I've actually interviewed women. I've actually interviewed women on the podcast also.
Okay. All right. Now, when you interview women, what is like the topic?
I've had women come on talk about relationships. I've had women come on talk about sex and intimacy. I've had women come on talk about entrepreneurship. So it's a wide range of topics.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to see something that helps men to be all they can be. I know in this environment we're in right now, this cultural environment, there's a lot of focus on women. It seems, and I've noticed that too, but it's because, women were not focused on for so long. And so it's like, you take turns.
So. And again, we don't want to have male against female kind of conversation.
It's not.
How can we, especially as Black folks, how can we create great relationships? Because it's great relationships that create great families. If you don't have great families, you can't have great communities. So it all starts with, first of all, the individual. Then it starts with relationships. Then it starts with the families. Then it moves out to the community. Then it moves out to your culture. And you change the world that way. So that's my goal, is to change the world one person at a time.
Well, one thing we don't do on this show, we are never negative about men.
Good. No, we love men.
We love men. Men are great. I mean, that's So no, we never this show will never be negative about men because men make the world go round. I mean, it takes two, you know.
There you
So
go.
so thank you so
And
much,
we and
Michael.
we and we love y'all too.
Okay.
All
Okay,
right.
yeah, it takes that's the compliment. They're
Mhm.
different. It's the Mars
Sure.
Venus or whatever, yin and yang or whatever you call it. It takes it works together, and men and women are different, but it's a complementary relationship, and
Amen.
you know we will never be negative about men on the show. So we thank you for
Again,
coming on.
and thank you for this platform. I've actually been to a couple of your book fairs, so I've been following you for a long time. And obviously, I'm a
Okay.
huge proponent of books and reading. So it's important that we read books.
Okay, you're
All
right.
types.
You're right. And we're both authors and
That's the
promoters
one
of
you
book
want to
as
read
well.
right there.
Okay. Well, thank you.
All right,
I'm
guys.
interested in knowing some of the other illusions in there.
There you go.
It's a nice cover, by the way.
It is.
Thank you.
It is. I like
Thank
the
you.
cover. Well, you have a
Appreciate it.
great evening, Michael.
All
Thank
right,
you for
ladies.
being on the show. And
Take
thank
care.
you for promoting Black men who are whole beings, well
Can you
rounded.
see that?
Black
Can you see
men
that?
rock. Okay, yes.
Rock.
Black men rock.
All right.
Okay. Thank you so
Bye bye.
much. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.